So what's going on guys, Kate's here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will show you the best Freyna build in the first Descendant. So in this build guide I will show you what weapons and modules you want to get. Then I will explain every single skill and show you the best reactor stats and external components. And then lastly we will take a closer look at the gameplay and mods, so you would be able to get the best results and highest damage possible and much more. So, if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then let's move over to the Freyna build. Her specialty is poisoning enemies with damage over time effects, which will cause them to get eliminated gradually. She can poison enemies in AoV, thanks to the venom skills. Enemies poisoned by this effect also leave behind poison footprints that will poison any enemies following them. Therefore, carefully positioning is an important factor when it comes to playing as Freyna. You can as well find ways to manipulate enemies into tight areas where they will easily spread the poison to each other. And finally, an extra bonus of the Freyna comes from her passive skill called the Contagious Link. This will cause the enemies which are poisoned by you to take extra damage, and because of our build, we will increase our toxic damage insanely high. So then let's take a look at the skills. Then the first passive skill is called the Contagious Links, which increases the Freyna's toxic skill power based on the number of nearby enemies afflicted with the poison. Then our first active skill is the Venom Trauma, that shows poison to attack the targeted enemy with damage and inflict room 0 trauma onto nearby enemies. Then the second one is Defense Mechanism, which significantly increases our defenses. There's also a chance of inflicting room 0 trauma to enemies upon attack. Then the next one is the Putrid Venom, which shows a poison to create a poison swamp. Enemies entering the poison swamp are inflicted with a constant damage and poisoned footprint state. When enemies are poisoned in the footprint state, they will walk around, which will create footprints that will poison other enemies. And finally we have the Venom Baptism, that switches gun to the Venom Baptism. Enemies hit by the skill are inflicted with room 0 trauma as well. And by the way guys, every time I said room 0 trauma, it is just a unique skill effect that only Freyna gets. This will deal extra damage and inflicts poison on nearby enemies at fixed intervals. Then now let's take a look at our build modules. Your module capacity cost limits how many modules you can equip, and they can be upgraded as you level up your character. Different modules have different capacity costs, which generally depend on how powerful the module is. This is a balancing system to prevent players from only equipping the strongest modules and having a totally overpowered character. But it's important to know that when equipping modules, make sure that as many modules as possible are in a slot with a matching icon. This will give you 50% discount on the module capacity cost. So here we have the best modules for your leveling build. You should be able to get this leveling setup by approximately level 25 to 30. This is a good base setup to have before preparing to farm the max level setup. So we want to get the Dual Claw that attacks using dual claws during a sub attack. Equipping a sub attack module also increases the module capacity. Then the Nimble Fingers, which reduces your skill cooldown. Then Skill Expansion, which increases your skill effect range for valid skills. Then HP Concentration, that improves your HP and skill critical hit rate. Then Skill Extension, that improves your skill duration. Then Strong Mentality, that reduces the resource cost when you use skills. And finally the Toxic Specialist, which increases your toxic skill power boost ratio. And just before we move on to the endgame setup, let me quickly explain why are some skill modules empty, like here for example. So basically, this slot modifies our skills, but the problem is that all the modified variants are worse for our build than the original. Therefore, we leave the slot empty, because there's not a single modifier in that slot, which could help our build. So it doesn't really matter what we do in that empty space. And after that is done, now we are ready for our max level module setup. So for the endgame build, I recommend to use the Contagion, which does that when an enemy is afflicted with room 0 trauma and dies, they will leave a contagion of poison around them. Then Dual Claw, that attacks using dual claws during a sub attack. Equipping a sub attack module increases the module capacity as well. Then Range HP Calculator, that improves your skill effect range and slightly improves your HP. Then Nimble Fingers, which reduces your skill cooldown. Then Skill Cost Optimize, that reduces your skill cooldown and slightly reduces your skill cost. Then skill expansion, which increases your skill effect range for valid skills. Then HP concentration, that improves your HP and skill critical hit rate. Then skill extension, that improves your skill duration. Then entropy acceleration, that slightly increases your max mana and skill critical hit damage. Then strong mentality, that reduces the resource cost when you use skills. Then toxic specialist, that increases your toxic skill power boost ratio. And finally the toxic master, which increases your skill power with additional increase for the toxic skills. So then finally, let's take a look at the best weapons and stats that we should use. So for our build, the Fallen Hope is the perfect weapon for our Freyna character, as it plays very well with her poison mechanics, by granting us bonuses when you shoot a poison target. And then for the weapon mods, here are the best ones, like the Concentrate Support Ammo, Weak Point Sight, Rifling Reinforcement, Concentration Stabilizer, Reload Priority, Sharpshooter, Fire Rate Priority, Defense Master, and Toxic Enhancement. You don't need these modules precisely, but of course, the more you have the better. And the most important one is Rifling Reinforcement, that boosts your overall damage with this weapon. Then second of all, we have the Nazestra's Devotion, which is a hand cannon that is great as a secondary weapon. It works especially well if you're good at aiming and are confident at hitting enemy weak points. Hitting an enemy's weak point with this weapon will reduce their defense by 30% for 3 seconds, which indirectly buffs the damage of all of your attacks. A carefully aimed shot from the Nazestra's Devotion makes this weapon amazing for single target boss fights. And lastly, another great secondary weapon that can help to buff our damage if you hit the enemy weak points is the Afterglow Sword Sniper Rifle. By hitting an enemy's weak point, it will inflict death propagation, which will improve the weak point damage by 5% per stack. You can also get extra critical hit rate when hitting commanders and other elite enemies with this weapon. And then last but not the least, we need to quickly look into the best reactor stats. So your reactor is a very important item that determines your skill damage and can also include extra modifiers that buff certain aspects of your build. The better your reactor is, the more damage your skills will deal to enemies. I recommend prioritizing using a reactor with a high skill power and a sub attack power. After that, look out for reactors with a boost to your toxic skill power and tech skill power boost, since most of the Freyna skills will fall into these categories. Other good stats to have are boosts to critical hit rate or critical damage. Also, you can look out for optimization condition that you can easily fulfill. For example, if you have a reactor that requires an equipped sniper rifle, meeting this condition increases the skill power of your reactor, so it's very important to meet this whenever possible. Our Freyna's attribute is toxic and her skills use dimension and tech, which means that you want to pick a reactor with a toxic phase that boosts your toxic and dimension type, or perhaps the toxic mechanics, which will boost your toxic and tech type. And finally, we have the external components. With your external components, you will be somewhat subject to RNG, at least until you've played the game for long enough to find basically every single possible combination with good stat rolls. So for this build, I generally recommend to get components with stats in max shields, max HP, HP recovery and defense. And that's about it. So with that said, I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or suggestions, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and not miss any more amazing content. With that said, you have an amazing day and I will see you in the next one, so take it easy, peace.